Einen schönen guten Tag. Wir begrüßen Sie aus der Hessischen Landesvertretung in Berlin für eine weitere Diskussion in unserer Reihe Was bedeutet das Coronavirus für die Europäische Union? Mein Name ist Christoph von Marschall. Ich bin der diplomatische Korrespondent der Chefredaktion des Tagesspiegels, der hier in Berlin erscheint. Und unser Gast heute ist der Botschafter Portugals, Francisco Ribeiro de Menezes. Kleine Vorwarnung, wir werden das Gespräch auf Englisch führen, aber selbst wenn Sie jetzt denken, oh, das ist eine Barriere, es lohnt sich, dran zu bleiben, aus mindestens 3 Gründen und vielen mehr. Aber 3 will ich nennen. Botschafter de Menezes war Mitglied der Rock- und Popband Sétima Legião, auf Deutsch die 7. Legion, und hat mit ihr eine goldene Schallplatte gewonnen. Zweitens hat Portugal die Ratspräsidentschaft der Europäischen Union von Deutschland übernommen. Und drittens ist Portugal, was Corona betrifft, gerade ein besonderes Sorgenkind in Europa. Aber zunächst begrüßt sie Hessens Staatsministerin für Bundes- und Europaangelegenheiten, Lucia Puttrich.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, ich darf Sie ganz herzlich begrüßen zu einer weiteren Folge One Click to Europe und zu der Grundfrage des Titels unserer Veranstaltung: Was macht das Coronavirus mit der Europäischen Union? Wir beschäftigen uns heute mit der Situation in Portugal und begrüßen heute den portugiesischen Botschafter, und in bewährter Art und Weise wird Dr. Christoph von Marschall das Gespräch führen. Und er hat schon eingeführt, wir haben einen interessanten Gast heute hier aus mehreren Gründen heraus, mit Sicherheit auch schon in der Person liegend, aber insbesondere auch aufgrund des Themas und der Situation in Portugal gerade im Moment. Die Situation in Portugal ist im Moment sehr angespannt. Wir erleben eine europäische Solidarität, in der wir uns gegenseitig helfen. Und was mich besonders interessiert, was können wir lernen von Portugal? Wie ist die Situation in Portugal entstanden? Und was haben wir unter Umständen auch zu erwarten von einem mutierten Virus? Haben wir da entsprechende Erkenntnisse? Kann man uns diesbezüglich Empfehlungen geben, wie wir uns verhalten sollten? Der zweite Bereich, Portugal hat im Moment die europäische Ratspräsidentschaft. Was haben wir diesbezüglich zu erwarten und wie viel Raum bleibt Portugal, diese Pläne auch entsprechend umzusetzen? Wir kennen das aus eigener Erfahrung heraus. Als Deutschland die Ratspräsidentschaft hatte, hatten wir viele Pläne, und dann letzten Endes gab es ein Thema, das dann überwogen hatte. Das ist in der Tat der Kampf gegen das Coronavirus, oder besser gesagt das Leben mit der Situation und die Frage, wie es in Zukunft weitergeht. Und das ist der dritte Punkt. Wie geht es in Zukunft weiter? Mich beschäftigt besonders die Zukunft der Europäischen Union. Was macht das Coronavirus mit uns? Was bedeutet das für die zukünftigen Herausforderungen? Und was müssen wir unter Umständen auch zukünftig anders tun? Es war die Zukunftskonferenz geplant, die soll jetzt auf den Weg gebracht werden, und ich würde mir wünschen, dass das dann auch den Blick für die Zukunft öffnet, logischerweise unter Einbindung auch der Länder, auch der Regionen, weil wir doch sehr gut wissen, was vor Ort notwendig ist. So insofern Ihnen allen miteinander heute eine interessante Veranstaltung.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Puttrich. Mit dem Botschafter Portugals, Ribeiro de Menezes, unserem Gast, werden wir heute Englisch sprechen. Ich hatte das schon kurz angekündigt. Wenn Sie Mühe damit haben, dann kann ich Sie erstens trösten. Betrachten Sie das einfach auch als eine Sprachlektion, denn Sie können heute dranbleiben und das Gespräch dann demnächst nochmals hören mit deutschen Untertiteln, also deutscher Übersetzung, und zwar auf dem YouTube-Kanal Hessen in Berlin und Europa. Herr Botschafter, schön, dass Sie da sind. Die Einführung mache ich noch auf Deutsch. Sie stammen aus einer Diplomatenfamilie. Auch Ihr Vater war schon Botschafter. Sie sind in Argentinien, in Frankreich, in den USA und in Portugal aufgewachsen, also auch Polyglott. Sie haben Jura studiert und sind seit einem Jahr Botschafter in Berlin. Zuvor waren Sie bei der NATO in Madrid und in Stockholm auf Posten, aber Sie waren vor allem auch Büroleiter, sowohl des Außenministers Luis Felipe Marques Amado und Büroleiter des Premierministers von Portugal, Coelho, und zwar in der Zeit nach der Finanzkrise. Auch da haben Sie sozusagen Krisenerfahrung. Und nun vertreten Sie hier in Berlin zugleich das Land der EU-Ratspräsidentschaft. And now let's switch to English. We always start these Europe talks with the state of the corona situation in the country of our guest. In Portugal, the new year began with 2 highlights, a positive and a negative. Portugal has now the presidency of the European Union, which is an honor, and I assume it's also a burden because of the workload which you have right now. But Portugal became also the country with the highest corona incidence in Europe. end of January, we counted 13,200 new cases per day in a population of around about 10 million people. Translated in cases per 100,000 people, this was 4 times higher than in Germany at that time. Intensive care units were overwhelmed. In the meantime, the numbers have fallen by 2/3. But what was the reason for the spike, and what is now the reason for the reduction?
Well, vielen Dank. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to the Minister. Thank you to the State of Hesse. I'm very proud to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about Portugal. Yes, it is an honor to hold the presidency. It's our 4th, and it is the 2nd time which we are very close to Germany as members of the trio. Now with the formal trio back in 2007, when we were discussing what would become the trio and when we drafted the Lisbon Treaty together. Yes, the presidency has coincided with a considerable spike in the number of COVID cases and related deaths. We were, as a country, comparatively less hit by the first wave. Numbers began to grow with the second wave in the late summer of last year. And I think that we have already identified 2 main causes for the surge in cases that we had earlier this year. First of all, there was considerable pressure to have an easing, more flexibility on restrictions over Christmas. And even with all the care that was put into designing those measures for Christmas, we had more cases as a consequence. The second factor has to be the entrance in this pandemic scene of the mutations of the virus. And Portugal had a significant number of cases stemming from the British mutation, which has had this impact. As you said, numbers have come down. We will go probably into this later. But just to give an idea to our viewers in Hesse, at the peak of the crisis, we had something like 16,000 cases a day. This was in late January. The numbers for yesterday are much lower. We had 1,500 cases. And the number of active patients is diminishing considerably, and it has been cut down by half since the end of January.
What are the lessons Germany can learn from the Portuguese experience? It sounded a little bit like you said, well, over Christmas we tried easing and had a huge backlash. Now you have found, of course, this British virus, which seems to be more contagious than the virus we had before, but you managed to get the numbers down. What does it mean in practical terms? What would you tell Germany if we are in a similar situation that this British or maybe even the South African virus or the Brazilian would enter our health system as well? Is it a mistake if you try to ease too much? Do we have rather to be strict? Or what are lessons?
Well, that's the first difficult question, because I think that from the outset, Europe has decided to take a joint approach to the response to the crisis, to the pandemic crisis. And part of that joint work has to do with shared experiences. We have been paying attention to what is happening in other countries, just like Germany is paying attention to what is happening in my country. And that shared experience is very good. Right now, if you compare lockdowns in Portugal and Germany, they are quite similar. We have gone for the closing of schools later than Germany. That might have been a factor also in the numbers that we have. We have gone for the closure of the retail sector while preserving the possibility to acquire essential goods, and we have tried to maintain the industrial sector at work while sending everyone we could into home office. I think that our approaches have been very similar towards the pandemic. I think that Lisbon looks a lot like Berlin today. The same sort of shops are open and the same type of shops are closed. But I would think that the essence is that, as I said, the more information you share, the wiser you become. And we have tried within the Union to have as much in common in terms of approach as possible. This has to do with circulation within the European Union and access into the European Union from third countries. And on most matters, I think that Portugal and Germany see eye to eye on this subject.
What is the outlook for the coming weeks and months? This is now always a question which is asked in Germany. Do the Portuguese see light at the end of the corona tunnel thanks to vaccination and because diseases of the respiratory tract ease with spring and summer as a general rule? Or is Portugal expecting many more weeks and months of suffering?
We have to be positive, and I think that we have very good reasons to be positive about. As you said, vaccination is underway. It has been, as we all know, a complicated process, not only in Germany, it has been complicated throughout Europe. I will give you an example. Portugal was expecting to receive 4.4 million doses of the vaccine in the first quarter. With the delays that have been detected, it turns out that we will be receiving probably 2 million doses, which is half. But the fact remains that the vaccination process is well underway. We have vaccinated over 500,000 citizens now. We have had very similar discussions to the ones you're having here about the priority groups, who should go first, who should wait, how do we determine the precedence in terms of access to the vaccine. The numbers are going down, and this means also that there are more people who are immune to the disease. And it means that together with the climatic change that we can expect with the change of seasons, we should be in a much better position by the summer. Obviously, we are expecting to have difficulties until quite possibly the end of the spring. And my government has been very clear in saying that there are two major dangers ahead. One, the question of the access to the vaccine and the distribution of the vaccine. We believe firmly that the European approach was the correct approach. Some mistakes have been made, and also from the supply side, some mistakes have been made. But we are trying very hard to correct them, and this is one of our main priorities as presidency. The second risk is the variations, the mutations of the virus. We are taking great care of this front. It is absolutely important that we master the variations, and they are present here in Germany as they are present in Portugal. Right now, we believe that the British variations account for about half of the active cases. So that's about 50,000 citizens infected with the British variation of the virus. And that's what we have to look at. But all in all, with the joint work, with all the effort that we've put into this, we believe that we have good reason to be confident for the incoming months.
The main headline for this series is how is Europe, how is the EU doing during the corona crisis? And for every country, that is there are two approaches. You have do your national drill. It is a national responsibility how you deal with your national citizens on one hand. On the other hand, we try to, or the European Union tries to show that it's also a question of solidarity, that is supranational. So how does this balance work for the Portuguese? How do they look at the moment at these two tracks, the national track and the European track? Do they experience solidarity from their co-EU partner countries? And maybe in a second take, how do they look at the EU? In Germany, you hear now much criticism that the European Union failed its members by not providing quickly enough the vaccines and so on and so on. So how is this emotional state at the moment? Portugal and the European Union, solidarity, national responsibility, how is the mix?
I think the mix is very positive at present. We have experienced European solidarity as a whole, because the European Union, as you know, does not have own competences in terms of
in health.
So we are covering new grounds. We are actually exploring ways to expand the work of the Union. And we are very mindful of the expression that Chancellor Angela Merkel used a while back about the European Health Union. I think that this has clearly become a common goal. We have experienced European solidarity in terms of health policy and health assistance. I assume that we will go later into the financial dimension of that solidarity. And we have also worked a lot with the civil society, with the people of Portugal. They know that Europe is with them. Actually, right now, there is a medical team from the Bundeswehr doing tremendous work at a Lisbon hospital. And we think that this medical team will rotate until the end of March. That's our perspective. We have also had bilateral assistance from countries with which we have very close connections, France, Luxembourg, just to name two. So emotionally, we feel supported. And I think that the Portuguese society has realized the importance of the sanitary measures and restrictions that are being applied. They understand the finality, they understand why they were taken, these decisions, and they understand what they are about. In Portugal, we have a civic duty to confine. It's not just about the number of contacts that you have. It's actually about staying home as much as possible. And that's why we went into a home office. That's why we have different social security schemes to support people in these situations. But it has been about staying at home as much as possible.
Are there fines and penalties if people don't do that?
Yes, yes.
Germany is very reluctant with it. I know nobody who has broken the rules and really paid a fine.
Well, I think that it is essentially a deterrent. And people are becoming increasingly aware of the existence of those fines, but they are not being applied as a rule. There has also been a discussion about the legal consequences and possible penal consequences of getting undue access to the vaccine. That's another case. In terms of how we perceive support from the outside and how we perceive the European Union. There has been a discussion about the vaccines, obviously. I dare say that it has not been quite as intense as here in Germany, although in both countries, much as in the rest of Europe, I suppose, the level of expectation was tremendous. I think that most people thought that access to the vaccine would be immediate, even for those who did not want it.
Yeah, it has anyway been an amazing change of feelings. I mean, last autumn, we have to remember, we talked about how long it takes to develop these kind of vaccines, and that if you're very lucky, it might be by spring or early summer of this year, and then it was very effective, the private industrial pharmaceutical sector, and provided the first vaccines already end of the year, and everywhere, of course, this also causes the expectations. I have to move on because, you mentioned already that Corona is not only a health crisis, is also an economic crisis. And again, we have the two track. It's national and then European solidarity. Let's start with the national experience. Portugal is relatively hard hit, harder than Germany or Denmark, which was our guest last week. I think the GDP is going down by over 8% percentage points. What is the reason? How can Germans better understand what is the Portugal economic structure? One can imagine that, for example, tourism has a much higher weight, but you know much better. So what is the reason that Portugal is harder hit economically than, let's say, Germany or Denmark?
Thank you. Two quick numbers. Our best estimates as to the contraction of GDP last year point to 7.6%, which is tremendous, but it's much lower than most of the estimates that we had throughout 2020. Some of them went all the way up to 10. And this coupled with a budget deficit of 6.3, which, although being also serious, is not quite as bad as we had foreseen earlier. The essence of this contraction of GDP has to do with the fact that our economy is diversified, but still dependent on tourism to a considerable extent. We are talking about tourism and associated industries as representing about 15% of GDP. And we must realize that tourism is extremely attractive as a proposition for quick growth because it is very easy to develop the infrastructure, to design the campaigns, and when you have a country such as Portugal, it's not difficult to convince people to visit and to go back, which is what Germans fortunately do. Even with this very severe contraction of the tourism sector, because most people stayed home and didn't visit, it was possible to have a performing economy that compensated for part of the revenue lost by the tourism sector. In abstract terms, if tourism shuts down, countries like Portugal could easily lose 10, 12, 13, 14% of their GDP. That did not happen. And that happens, why? Because our economy, as I said, is diversified and fortunately present in sectors which require tremendous knowledge and innovation and collaboration with third parties. And that's why Germany is very much present in the industrial sector in our country.
That's interesting. So you say, of course, in numbers, they sound hard hit, -7, -8, but it could have been much worse given the economic structure of a country like Portugal. Generally, your country came out quite successful of the financial crisis, which hit the whole world some 12 years ago. So you were really on a positive move upwards, and then Corona hit. And now the European perspective. And in order to respond to this economic crisis, the European Union has rolled out an economic rescue package of gigantic size, at least for European normal years, much bigger than ever before, financed mainly through public debt. But the decision and ratification process is very slow. We have been discussing this for almost a year. I remember the first Italian question started last March, and in April we had several EU summits. Now the European Parliament has just voted on this package a few days ago. The German Bundestag will pick up the subject soon, but the final vote of the Bundestag is end of March. Yes. And when will the money finally flow to countries like Portugal or Italy, which urgently need it? It seems, again, if you look at it from the outside, that the European takes up pretty slow and not quick and effective. It's certainly not an immediate help.
Let's see, that's a lot of questions, but I will try to be as analytical and brief as possible. Starting from the end, we think that it will be possible to have the funds flowing by the end of the spring. Even yesterday, Commissioner Gentiloni was being interviewed in Brussels. He oversees these matters in the Commission. He was positive about this, and we have been, as Presidency, very insistent on this with the other capitals, because we want to accelerate the process of ratification of the own resources decision as much as possible. This is the decision that will allow the Commission to go to the markets to borrow so as to finance the fund for recovery, the resilience and recovery fund, which is the essence of the European response. Why has it taken so long? Well, it depends on the national procedures of the member states. In Portugal, we have already set the example, as it were, and we have ratified already this amendment. We were very happy to see that the discussions with the European Parliament, which are largely conducted by the Presidency, were successful, and it was possible to sign the regulation that's the basis for the work of the fund, for this mechanism. And we have then to go back. If you remember, in the spring last year, Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Emmanuel Macron came up with a plan which proved to be the basis for what Germany steered and guided through the European Union during its presidency during last semester. And it was the first time that in European Union history there was an agreement by all member states to issue debts, common debts, held by the European Commission on behalf of the European Union. This is a tremendous change. It's a tremendous change, certainly here in Germany, but it was also a tremendous change for many other countries. Right until the very end, we didn't know if this was going to be possible. As you remember, in December, we had to go back to the drawing board on this issue because two countries were raising questions about the connection between the funds and the rule of law mechanisms.
Poland and Hungary. Mm-hmm.
In the end, it was possible to persuade those two countries, and it was possible to come up with a compromise solution accepted by all member states. It takes time, yes, but it is something new, and the funds can be used with the degree of flexibility that allow them to be tailor-made for each country. And that is why we believe that one of the priorities of our presidency is to see this process through. We want to get to the spring with the national recovery plans approved and ready to be implemented. If we do that, it will be a good presidency.
We are almost at the end, but we should use the remaining minutes to concentrate on the priorities of the Portuguese EU presidency. You have taken over from Germany, and of course there's a lot of continuity, but we have also taken into account geography and traditions. Germany is a country in Central Europe, closer to Russia, let's say, closer to the north. Portugal is at the southwest corner, close to Africa, has traditions with South America and so on. But there's still the European Union and the common interest. So what are the, let's say, 3 top priorities of the Portuguese EU presidency? Where you want to put a mark on that?
That's easier. First of all, to tell you that yes, we work as a trio. There's a common program. And national programs are drafted within the bounds of that program. And we have a lot to be thankful for with Germany, and that's why I say that, and I mean it, when we began our presidency, we were standing on the shoulders of giants. It was a very successful presidency. We have talked about the health policy and the response to the pandemic. We have talked about the economic response to the pandemic. The other axis of our presidency will be the social response to the pandemic. We have to revisit and revamp and improve the social pillar of the European Union. The European Union is based on a social market economy. We need to make sure that the people, those who have been more afflicted, harder hit by the pandemic, can access the different programs that are being implemented, and that this move towards change in terms of climate policy, in terms of digital agenda, that this will leave no one behind. We want to have a society with people with skills. We want to have a society that believes in innovation so that its enterprises can become competitive, and so that people who enter the job market actually find jobs. And we want to have a social network of support that will take care of those who face specific difficulties. The fourth axis, if we do it according to this very quick overview of the program, has to do with Europe's role in the world. We want to have strategic autonomy for Europe. We don't want to confuse this with a protectionist Europe. We want a Europe that is able to deal with its trade partners in a constructive way. We want to foster our economic relations, and we want Europe to have her role in the world, not because it is protectionist, but because it is competitive. The other main reason for us to have a positive outlook in the future has to do also with our foreign agenda. The single most important factor is that we have the Biden administration in Washington. It's an administration that is committed to multilateralism, to working with its partners, and to tackle the common changes that the world is facing. And this is going to be central to our presidency. And because we also have a long track record in terms of world presence, we have identified a number of priorities for our presidency. As Germany selected China, we have selected India. We believe that we should foster relations with India. We believe that it is obviously the largest democracy in the world. It has a lot to offer. It's also a balance to China in the Indo-Pacific region. We want to continue to foster relations with Africa. We would very much like to be able to hold the much sought EU-African Union summit as soon as possible. We want to deal with Latin America. We want to keep pushing for the enlargement process of the European Union in the Western Balkans. We strongly believe that what was good for Portugal must be good for the rest of the European countries that want to join this amazing project that the EU constitutes. Obviously, we are multilateralists at heart, and we cannot forget that we still have a very special relationship with the United Kingdom, and we have to keep at it to sort out the remaining issues and to define a relationship that is as close and mutually beneficial as possible.
We are always almost up with our time, but I permit myself to challenge you on one point. If I try to put it in a nutshell, you say the European Union has to strike a balance between resilience and openness. Yes. Resilience against partners which are not always nice and which are challenging us and where we have to stay our ground. And on the other hand, we want to be open, a good partner, cooperation. What do you think, if you just take into your mind, what is a picture of the European Union abroad? Which is the harder challenge? To convince people that the European Union can be nice and cooperative, or to convince them we can also be resilient and hit back if somebody challenges us? Which is the harder?
Oh, by diplomatic instinct, I would try not to answer you.
That is also
because but I think
yes,
but I think that you know, they say that a diplomat is a person who thinks twice and then shuts up.
Yeah.
Which is
okay.
But I can answer you. I think that if we define our priorities and if we project correctly the image that we want to send out, it will be very easy for any conceivable partner to understand that the European Union means business and has the means to mean business. Mm-hmm. What do I mean by this? We can be perceived as a soft power, and that's probably the prevailing view that the world has about the European Union, but we are much more than that. This strategic autonomy of which we talk is not directed against anyone in particular, but it has to do with recovering the possibility of facing certain types of crises, of correcting mistakes that were made in the past, while remaining open to those who want to do fair business with our continent. And that is why we are so insistent on the pursuit of this modern generation of trade agreements. There's Mercosur, extremely debated. There's Chile, there's Mexico, there's agreements with Pacific states. There's quite a bit to do, and also with the United States on that front.
So there is this balance, as you try to explain. Some of us felt really sorrow when they saw the foreign representative in Moscow and it looked like he was not taken serious. You have shown us that the European Union can also do business and especially trade talks. Now we are at the end. We thank you very much, but I have to ask, since you mentioned soft power, music is also part of the soft power, and since we introduced you as somebody who was also part of a rock and pop band, the 7th Legion, which is, I think, an allusion to Roman times, if I'm not mistaken. Do you still play music? Can your musical abilities be part of diplomacy, or do you rather say, no, that was my private interests, and I'm a good diplomat even if I'm not taking to the stage with a pop band?
Well, the 7th Legion was the Roman Legion stationed at the time in Lusitania, center north of Portugal. It has always been a part of my life. I dealt mostly with the words and the composition of songs, and I just play a little bit of keyboards, but the words are so important, and they have been so important in my life that I'm always trying to find the rhythm of the sentences and the cadence and the beat. So I think that it's very much around me and very much present in everything I do. One of the happiest moments I have here in Berlin, and we must thank the Senate of Berlin for that decision, bookshops and some record stores are open. So I visit each week a very famous record and bookshop by Unter den Linden, and that's when I keep abreast with everything that comes out, and I spent quite a bit of time there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Wenn Sie das zum Schluss neugierig gemacht hat, wir haben ja ein bisschen überzogen, googeln Sie einfach den Namen des Botschafters Ribeiro de Menezes und eventuell noch 7. Legion, und Sie finden dann auch einige Links zu den Songs. Ich glaube, Sie haben die meisten Songs geschrieben für diese Band, obwohl Sie damals gar nicht immer in Portugal waren, sondern auch aus den Vereinigten Staaten noch in der Jugend. Wir können das jetzt hier nicht ausführen. Sie werden das alles finden. Wir verabschieden uns für heute aus der hessischen aus der hessischen Landesvertretung in Berlin. Wir können uns aber schon bald wiedersehen, wenn Sie mögen. Dann ist die lettische Botschafterin Inga Skujina unser Gast, gefolgt vom tschechischen Botschafter Tomáš Kafka, der übrigens auch eine künstlerische zweite Karriere hat, neben seiner diplomatischen. Er ist nicht Musiker, sondern Dichter und Poet. Das Wichtigste aber, bleiben Sie gesund, und wir freuen uns auf ein Wiedersehen demnächst hier in der Reihe die Europäische Union in der Corona-Krise. Vielen Dank.